petition update, Mr. Trenton Arnold.
Waiting for the presentation to come up, and I'll wait for it to. Okay. Dr. Johnson, members of the board, and Mr. Thurman, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon and provide you and the community with an update regarding the status of the district's charter petition. As a general reminder to the board, the state legislature has required that no later than June 30th, 2015, each local school system shall notify the Department of Education of its intention to request increased flexibility pursuant to this article, or decide not to request increased flexibility in exchange for increased accountability and defined consequences, and opt to remain under current laws, rules, regulations, policies, and procedures. So once again, in exchange for increased autonomy, including waivers from state laws and Georgia Department of Education rules and regulations, districts receive the flexibility to be innovative and thereby show greater accountability and higher student performance. Recalling the April 1st, 2014 board meeting, the superintendent informed the DeKalb Board of Education that the district would pursue charter system status after receiving the executive summary from the district's Flexibility Advisory Committee. This document provided the superintendent with critical elements and information to take into account when making the final decision to pursue either charter system status, investing in educational excellence, or IE squared status, or remaining as a status quo system. This executive summary was completed after months of work from the members of the Flexibility Advisory Committee and the inclusion of citizen input from the first round of community engagement sessions. After the superintendent's decision, the district met its legal obligation by submitting its required letter of intent to the Georgia Department of Education, and then began the process of gathering information and community input to assist in drafting the charter petition application. The district's current timeline to complete the charter petition application includes continued meetings with the Flexibility Advisory Committee and the just completed second round of community engagement sessions. These additional community engagement sessions brings the total number of input sessions to 10 since the district first began reviewing the flexibility options being provided by the Department of Education. Community members will also have the opportunity to address the board directly, both later this afternoon and again on October 6, 2014. The current proposed date for the board to vote to approve the petition is at the October 6, 2014 business meeting. While this timeline is very aggressive, it was designed so as to meet subsequent petition approval timelines from the Department of Education, as well as specific language that was being provided to districts from the Department of Education's Charter Division, that all waivers would be lost after June 30th, 2015, except in cases of natural emergency. However, communications received at the end of last week from the Department of Education's Charter Division are stating that proposed amendments to the charter system rules and guidelines will be presented to the State Board of Education for adoption at their November 6, 2014 meeting. These proposed amendments will allow for any local district that has met the June 30th, 2015 deadline to submit a letter of intent and indicated that they will become a charter system to be eligible to have any fiscal year 16 waivers for which they are eligible should they have been a charter system. These waivers would be provided to districts even though they do not have an executed charter system contract at the time. It is important to take a few moments to discuss with the board how charter system status impacts the district's current charter schools. State law provides those schools currently operating as startup and conversion charters with the option of maintaining their current petition with the state or joining the district's petition. However, it is their choice whether they wish to join the district's petition or not. Schools that are included as part of the district's petition are then referred to as system charter schools. Furthermore, the state also allows any system charter school to leave a district's petition even after the district's petition has already been approved by the state and seek to become a conversion charter. Before speaking this afternoon about the input the district has received from multiple stakeholders and how that input will guide the drafting of the district's petition, I would like to now spend a few moments reviewing the three major elements that the Department of Education requires applicants to address in their charter petitions: the case for being awarded charter status, meeting the required performance expectations, and maximizing school-level governance. First, any district seeking charter system status must be able to clearly detail what it will accomplish by obtaining charter status that it cannot already accomplish. This includes considerations associated with the challenges a district may face in increasing the opportunities for academic growth and achievement for all of its students and schools, and listing the waivers from state law that are necessary to effectively address those challenges through innovation. The flexibility and innovation sought by a district should clearly have a direct impact on student growth and achievement. The second key element required by the state in a charter application is the expectation that the district and schools meet certain academic performance measurements. These measurements are fairly straightforward, and the two used by the state to determine if performance expectations are being met are the College and Career Ready Performance Index and the Beating the Odds measurement, which was specifically created by the Georgia Department of Education's Charter Division to measure charter system and charter school performance. What is important to note here is that charter system renewals are based in part on the district and individual schools matching or outperforming the state's CCRPI results and beating the odds when compared against similar districts. These academic measurements are not the sole determining factor for petition renewal, but should the state choose not to renew a system's charter status for academic performance or any other reason, the system returns to status quo status and all waivers to state law and Department of Education policies and regulations are lost. The final key element for a charter system application focuses on local school governance and autonomy. In order to be even considered a charter system, districts must be willing to provide as much autonomy as possible at the local school level. This autonomy requires the involvement of the district in assisting in the transition at each school from school advisory councils to local school governance teams, or LSGTs, developing a process for the election of local school governance team members, making sure that all local school team members are trained in the application of governance roles and responsibilities, and making certain that local school governance teams focus on governance rather than administration at their local school. To be clear, districts must specify the level of autonomy that will be granted to local school governance teams, but districts should also take into account those governance elements that extend beyond the scope of the local school governance teams and what decision-making authority still resides with the central office. However this balance between local schools and the central office is established in the petition, it is important to note that the authority of the Board of Education is not impacted. Input from parents, teachers, principals, students, and community members will play an important role in the development of the petition, and multiple meetings have been held for this purpose. At each of these meetings, the questions, comments, concerns, and ideas are transcribed, and common themes have begun to emerge. Some of the common themes heard at the community engagement sessions include enthusiasm for local school autonomy and the desire for greater decision-making related to allocation of resources. Community members also noted that absolute clarity related to the level of autonomy for schools must be present in the petition, as well as clarity in the level of control that the central office will maintain over local schools. At each of the community engagement sessions, parents also stated that current choice programs should not be impacted by the district's decision to pursue charter system status. It was also clear that confusion between conversion charter schools, startup charter schools, and charter system schools is present in the community. Community members strongly pointed out that the district's petition should not cause declines in student growth and achievement, and parents and community members also went on to express concerns about capacity for implementation of local school governance teams at all 137 sites, as well as the assurance that schools and resources would remain comparable and equitable. Principals noted similar concerns with implementation of local school governance teams in their 5 meetings, but they were truly excited about the opportunity to waive state laws and implement innovative strategies that could best serve their students. Clarity of the role of central office in supporting schools was also mentioned as a concern for principals. As described earlier, the Flexibility Advisory Committee has continued to meet, and members felt that capacity was also a major piece to be addressed by the petition. However, this team extended this concept of capacity beyond the schoolhouse to include the district's central office and its ability to support local school autonomy both fiscally and administratively. It should also be noted, though, that like the principals, the FAC sees the potential for charter system status to support innovation, growth, and achievement across the entire district. Clearly, then, the district has the potential to submit a charter petition that meets the needs of multiple student groups, including economically disadvantaged students, students with disabilities, students with limited English proficiency, refugee students, and our gifted and talented students. Furthermore, opportunities to increase and support greater parental engagement are present through the establishment of local school governance teams. Communication and cooperation with parents can improve, and language barriers that may be present within the district can continue to be overcome. The district's petition can allow the DeKalb County School District to hire outstanding leaders and teachers without the impact of restrictive certification requirements, thus ensuring equitable access to career, technical, and academic programs and pathways for all of our students. All of this input and opportunities for the district equate to innovative strategies to consider for the inclusion in the district's petition. These strategies can include innovation for program delivery for various student groups, opportunities for flexibility in scheduling students to best meet the needs of schools and students, and the ability to provide services to struggling students to reach content mastery through demonstration of content mastery rather than seat time alone. Flexibility in staffing allocations could also be included as part of the district's petition and include the ability to integrate subjects and share staff. The possibility for the creation and support of gender-based classrooms also exists, along with the allowance for meeting student seat time requirements without having to actually be present in a physical building. Further flexibility from state laws could lead to multi-age groupings based upon student instructional level and the ability to offer older students with courses during non-traditional times. It is important to note, however, that the waivers and innovations listed in the district's petition are not all-inclusive. By granting charter status to a system, the state is providing districts and system charter schools a blanket waiver to all state laws and Department of Education policies and regulations. If the district or a school determines that an innovative practice requiring a waiver to a state law is necessary to support student growth and achievement, the innovative practice can be implemented at any point during the 5-year term of the charter contract. Input from the many different meetings held also allows a district's petition to address concerns about local school governance teams and schoolhouse autonomy. The petition can allow for the creation of cohorts to elect, train, and support local school governance team. Criteria should be established to address how schools will be selected for the first cohort, but this could include vertical alignment and the district's choice programs, for example. Furthermore, the opportunity for appointments made by the principal in addition to the elected representatives will be considered for inclusion in the petition. While autonomy for local schools is a critical element for the charter petition, as discussed earlier in this afternoon's presentation, there's still a need to establish a clear balance between the authority of the central office and the distributed autonomy granted to schools and local school governance teams. Risk criteria that require central office oversight to local school innovation and autonomy should include any decision-making that impacts federal funding, compromises student safety, involves legal affairs, and reduces economies of scale. As the drafting of the petition moves forward, the district will examine innovative strategies from other districts that have increased student growth and achievement. By examining Broad finalists, districts participating in Harvard's Public Education Leadership Project, and other successful districts, not just from across the state, but across the nation, the district can determine if innovative practices used at these locations can address the opportunities available in the DeKalb County School District. State law and Department of Education policies and regulations that are preventing DeKalb from moving forward with innovative strategies will be identified so as to be addressed in the petition. This will allow the district to complete its petition with an anticipated date of board and public review 10 days prior to the October board meeting. I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, as well as future opportunities to update the board on this exciting opportunity.
Thank you very much for your report. Is there any discussion?
Well, he had his hand up first. I don't know what that means, Marshall, but I'll go first.
Go ahead, Marshall.
Yes, sir.
So thank you. I've got a couple of questions and a couple of comments in a number of areas. I had the opportunity to attend the session at Lakeside, and I've conferred with people who have been at some of the other sessions. And I think one of the things, unfortunately, that was very evident was there remains not just a lingering, but some profound mistrust about the system. I mean, I think we've touched on it briefly. It is more than problematic. It is a problem, and I think it is particularly a problem in a choice. If we were to make this choice, and we've given a letter of intent, but we haven't actually made the choice, and a choice which retains a structure that is still highly centralized and distributes over 137 buildings. And that's sort of just my background, because I think there's a couple things. One of the things is that the law, am I correct, recognizes a couple different options, including a charter system, a system of charter schools, i.e. squared, and one of the options is a system of charter clusters as one of the options available under the law. And what I first want to know is whether you've had any discussions internally about that as an option rather than pursuing the status as a charter system.
Is that an administration question, Mr. Wilson?
Well, it is. I mean, we're trying to get an understanding of where, we're ultimately going to have to make a choice, and there are options, and that authority vests in the Board of Education. And so, I'm trying to get an understanding, and I have, I will add this in my comments about, but I'm trying to see if whether it's even been explored as one of the options to bring before us ultimately. And if so, what the thoughts were and what the discussion was.
Well, yes, to your question, all the options were explored and examined. We could arrange a time and a place for us to go back through that process and then detail as to how we came to the conclusion that a charter system would be the best option for DeKalb County. But the answer is yes. And of course, ultimately, the Board of Education will determine as to whether or not that is, in fact, the direction we take.
And part of my question is I don't want to say troubled because I think we're early in the process, but as I look at the presentation, I understand the thoroughness, I understand the complexity of this. I haven't seen in this yet the compelling reason, the gut level compelling reason why this is the choice we should make. Many of the things that are talked about in here are things we could be doing now, even without choosing. We could defer and push more local governance to our schools by choice. We could have multi-age groupings. We do it in our Montessori schools, so we already have examples of doing that. The state has allowed single-gender schools. I know that the city of Atlanta has 2 middle schools that are single-gender middle schools. So there are things that aren't. I think we need to be careful that we don't represent that the innovations are contingent on the choice of status, that they may be part of a menu of things we decide to do, but some of which we could do, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we could do without ever changing our status.
That is a fair analysis, Mr. Orson, and certainly I think that the language that's been used, and I think it's a fellow Metro superintendent may have said it in one of the charter district meetings that, you know, a lot of times these innovative practices that we're talking about are prevented due to cages of our own design.
Right.
And there are some that do not require waivers, but there are also those that do. And you know, I could certainly move into anecdotal evidence and communications that I've had with principals just this school year with situations that have come up where they were communicated to me just without knowing what they were referencing, that they had opportunities to implement programs or opportunities to hire staff, but those programs were not able to be implemented in DeKalb, and the staff were not able to be hired because the district does not have waivers from those legal requirements and State Department of Education policies that restrict them.
Though, under those circumstances, we certainly could apply for the waivers, and if I understand correctly, that not only at the November session are they going to look at terms of the rules around charter systems, but my understanding is that they're also going to look at, under those conditions, which they might actually, even though the law says one thing, allow systems to apply for waivers even if they're a status quo system. Is that correct? Or at least your understanding. I can't predict what they'll do, but that's
to recent communications, that is correct. And like you say, we cannot predict what the State Board of Education is going to do, but there are some items on the table for a presentation at their November 6th meeting that would allow systems that have met the legal obligation to submit their letter of intent by June 30th, 2015, and have stated that they are going to become a charter system to apply for waivers for fiscal year 16 that they would probably have if they had an active charter between the State Board of Education and the local Board of Education.
So then, and to make sure we're in compliance, so we really have, in terms of submitting the actual charter petition till June of 2015, if I'm understanding the timetable, but there's not, is it longer in the petition, or just the letter of intent has to be by June of 2015?
The only legal requirement is to submit the letter of intent by
Okay.
June 30th, 2015. The original language that was used by the Department of Education was that after that date, no waivers would be granted at all, except in cases of natural emergency. But as you know, and as the discussion is, there's proposals to change that language.
So it seems to me that we have a lot more runway than we might have thought. And I understand we thought get ahead of the crowd. There's a lineup. You know, we don't want to be the last person in the security line at Hartsfield on a Monday morning. But I mean, that we do, given that there seems to be, I think, some issues out in our community, and this trust issue being a big one in my mind. You know, part of me thinks that we might be better off slowing this up to accommodate, to both build a relationship and get a better, clearer understanding from our own communities about what it is in more detail, what they want, to get a better understanding of what we might actually be willing to offer, get a better understanding of what the state is willing to do, since the state seems to be in some transition, to get a better understanding of our own kind of commitment and competency. I mean, I think implicit in a lot of the comments we heard, you know, I think what people don't fully appreciate is that we talk about things that may be retained by the central office, but there is explicitly in the law, as well as in the guidelines from the Department of Education, about, you know, they have that little continuum, and the expectation is that if the continuum to that side is maximizing control over finances, HR, and governance at the local school level, the expectations of the state and the State Board of Education are that you will end up over there as opposed to over there. And that doesn't really mean what direction I'm pointing, but I mean, I think I've looked at the guidelines. I've heard the presentation from Phil Hartley, who's the GSBA outside counsel. I've talked to people. I mean, I don't think that the conclusion that I just offered is I believe it's in alignment with what the state's expectations are. Would you, I mean.
I think that the analysis that you've given, especially regarding the transition that is currently in place right now, and the moving pieces is accurate, but with the understanding that the district's initial timeline was based on multiple communications from the Department of Education, multiple presentations, not just from the Department of Education, but State Board of Education staff, on the restrictive nature of the timelines that the state had and the expectations that they had, but have subsequently been modified as of last week.
Right. And so, no, I
right,
appreciate
so,
that. I
yeah.
appreciate it was all done in good faith, good intentions, but now that we appear to have more room, coupled with the feedback we've gotten, coupled with, and then this is just at my level, about whether this is the best, if we're going to seek a charter status of some sort, and I will just say it, for the public record, I think or debate about one particular cluster, I think the heft of a cluster, I think, is a healthier model in the long run, because we know in a system of 137 schools, 137 buildings, we're going to have a number of buildings that are going to take some time, if not much longer, to build the capacity we think they need to have self-governance, but baked within a cluster, sort of the mutual strength that's offered by a high school and a middle school and multiple elementary schools, I believe, would offer an opportunity for each of those communities that are often defined around our high schools anyway, to provide the kind of sort of aid and comfort they need for those schools that may be weaker and take longer to develop self-governance. And I think that size, because there is a push and pull. We at the central office, and I'll include the board, the bureaucratic organizations have a tendency not to want to give anything up. That is just in their nature. It is true everywhere. I mean, our former labor commissioner, I'm sure, it dealt with that when he was the labor commissioner, right? Nobody wants to give up anything. I see this as the push and pull of this is that I believe it's hard for 137 individual entities, regardless of getting away to the debate of how much authority we give them, as a single entity, to have a lot of impact on what happens up the line. It's just you're so diffused. I think you run the risk, particularly in the environment we operate, of really minimizing their capability. And I think the charter clusters, which we have built clusters as a model, provides more heft for people to push back against us. And I can say as a board member, I welcome that, because I think the success of a choice around charter, whatever we fill in after it, requires that kind of tension and the ability to actually influence what happens. And I just worry that 137, we might as well have 1,037, because no one voice can be loud enough to actually make great success in terms of pushing back against kind of the centralized authority, which the entire charter system and idea is meant to sort of diffuse that authority. So,
thank you, sir. And the state allowance, to your point, does allow for cohorts for rollouts of those local school governance teams. And within petition elements, those cohorts could be organized in whatever structure would best fit the needs of the district, especially in larger districts like DeKalb.
But we could commit in the petition to a system of charter clusters if we wanted to. That could be a choice that we made in the petition that we filed. Is that?
Well, not necessarily, because the district is only submitting one petition. You could organize within that single petition cluster or rollout.
But we have a pathway if we ultimately decided that might be a better or stronger organizing principle to do that as part of the actual formal petition.
The State Board of Education and the Charter Petition Act is going to require that all local schools have their local school governance team. But there's nothing, but as a minimum, there's nothing that is preventing collaborative efforts among schools, including vertical alignments, to allow those schools to work collaboratively, such as in a cluster, within that petition.
I'll make this my last, because
okay.
But there is a provision in the law that recognizes that you can also choose to organize as a system of charter clusters. Right, that's one of those subsets. There's 6 categories. So I've seen it. So you can choose to organize a system of charter schools, or you can choose to organize as a system of charter clusters. So I'm trying to understand why, if we collectively decided that might be a better organizing principle, that we could not bake that into the actual petition, since the law recognizes that as one of the choices you can make in petitioning for a charter status.
You are correct. There is the capacity for charter systems or charter clusters to petition as a charter group, But again, then you'd have a petition for every single cluster rather than a single petition for the district.
And of course, that's a decision that only the Board of Education will make. Not Mr. Arnold, not the administration. We'll make a recommendation, but at the end of the day, the men and women that are sitting around this table will make the final decision.
Right, and I just want to be able to understand that in sussing this out and the ultimate choice we make, that there are choices and sub-choices that can be made in the petition. And so it seems to me that because the petition is kind of made from whole cloth to a certain extent, there are guidelines that if we could choose to organize as a system of charter clusters, or we could choose in our petition to commit to organizing around clusters as part of the petition of being a charter system. I think the state is looking for that kind of sort of innovation and broad thinking about how you would implement charter status. I don't think they expect, the whole point, it would be self-defeating for them to expect that every petition that said it was going to be a charter system would look exactly the same, because then just dictate that from up top and don't even go through this exercise.
Two things. We would like to give an opportunity to research that rather than to give an answer prior to, and to talk to Dr. Bowles and others as to the correctness or lack thereof of that position. I'm not saying it's not, but I don't think we're in a position to really make a clear call on it. Second thing, when you said the state, November, first Tuesday will determine what the state actually means. It's almost past tense. And we don't know what the state's position will be come January 1st, 2015.
Which might be another reason for us slowing this process up.
And we've heard the comments. I mean, we're very sensitive to the concerns, comments from across the district. But
we want to respect everybody's time, each board member's time, so we want to make sure we're very sensitive to the time that we have for this part of the meeting, but yet and still I want to be respectful to each board member. So just keep that in mind. Mr. Mayfield?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Arnold, thank you for the presentation. And I had an opportunity, as you know, to observe at least 3 of the meetings, Stevenson, Towers, and Lakeside. And a lot of good input from the community on this. And so my questions are really sort of in 2 categories. One has to do with the timeline and or the process for getting to through the timeline, as well as a couple of content points that I'd like to ask questions about. So right now we're looking at a calendar from slide on page 3, the top of slide 3. I'm not sure what slide number that is, but it looks at the October date. And given the meeting of the Board of Education to amend at least the policies and maybe even some legislative recommendations being in November, it seems to me to be prudent to at least defer any decision regarding our petition at least until after that meeting.
Yes, so this timeline that's before you was based upon initial language from the State Department of Education.
Correct.
And they have subsequent timelines that follow after local board approval. And in order for a petition to make their April 2015 State Board of Education meeting for approval and contracting between the State Board and the local Board of Education, it has to be submitted to the Department of Education by November 1. So it's a 6-month prior timeline. So that is the reason behind the current timeline, with October 6th board meeting being the time when the petition would be approved. However, to your point, you are correct that it now appears that there may be some action from the state, or proposed action from the State Board of Education on November 6th. The October 6th date for the district would, of course, allow the district to some additional time if they were still trying to meet that November 1 deadline for any adjustments or revisions or recommendations from the Board of Education at that October 6th meeting.
Right. So, Mr. Superintendent, I would request that at least at a minimum that we understand the potential implications for the November 6th meeting on the November 1 date, so that by the October meeting, so that we know at that point whether or not it's actually necessary to even make that decision on that date. The second point that I would make with regards to the process has to do with the approval process from the board. the board didn't have to approve the letter of intent, right? We would have to approve that the petition go forward. Would we then approve the petition once it's completed, prior to it going to the state?
Yes, sir. The board would have to vote to accept the petition and move it forward to the State Department of Education at the October 6th meeting.
Right. So subsequent to that meeting or that decision, a petition will be produced. My question is whether or not before that petition actually goes to the state, whether or not there is an intervening vote on the part of the board to approve the content of the petition following the approval of drafting the petition.
That is sort of the combined point of the October 6th board meeting. The petition is going to be presented to the board and the public at least 10 days prior to that October 6th meeting to give the board an opportunity to review it, as well as the public to review it, if in case they want to come in and make comments at the public hearing. And then should there be any necessary revisions or recommendations at the October 6th board meeting, the board can vote to delay that item as an agenda item and hold a called meeting at some point in October if they anticipate trying to make that November 1 deadline.
Okay. A couple of points about, I guess, content. Maybe this one is sort of in the middle between content and process. And it has to do with the question of autonomy at the local level, as well as the input that the public gave during this series of meetings. Now, I know in prior discussions that we've had, an actual vote on the part of the public was required as a part of the legal process to move the petition forward. And my question is whether or not the input from those meetings is essentially a surrogate for the vote, and if so, how does this process ensure or qualify the inclusion of that input into the deliberation?
Thank you. That's a great question. The Department of Education and their rules and guidelines, as well as the Charter System Act of Charter Schools Act of 1998, is not as detailed on the process as you're referencing. There are certain requirements that are expected to be met, but there is not a requirement for a public vote on approval of the charter petition or elements within the charter petition. It is a sole responsibility that's granted to the Board of Education at the local level. What DeKalb has attempted to do is to include these multiple community engagement sessions, the 10 that we've had, plus the principal engagement sessions, the Student Advisory Council meeting. We're meeting with the Teacher Advisory Council meeting on September 11th to gather input. And what often happens in these discussions is that individuals will look for a drafted petition to address, but that's really not the best method to go about drafting a petition. The better method is to say to individuals, community members, principals, what do you think is necessary for innovation? What sort of flexibility would you like to have to help govern your school? What should a local school governance team look like? And then through the comments and the questions and the concerns and the input that's provided, common themes start to emerge very quickly. We saw it in the first round of the 5 community engagement sessions that we had when the Flexibility Advisory Committee drafted the executive summary to give to the superintendent, and we're seeing it now as well. Some of those concerns, again, address the capacity for the local school governance teams and how that will look at the local level, the ability of the district to support that autonomy and the local school governance team, and some questions about the timeline. So we've seen that consistently throughout all 5 of our community engagement sessions, and those themes start to come forward pretty quickly.
Would it be appropriate or even accurate to suggest that the flexibility teams set of criteria that went into or that will go into forming the petition as compared to the input that was received from the public during those 5 sessions, if those themes happen to emerge and be in sync with each other, would it be fair to say that's coincidental as opposed to public input?
No, it's not coincidental. I mean, when we see those themes, we know that they are common throughout the district, and they will actually guide the drafting of the petition. Okay. When we see those concerns, or even if it's in the form of a question or a statement, not even a suggestion from the public or from our principals or even our students. We recognize that that is something that needs to be clearly addressed and detailed in the petition application.
Okay. Then finally to the content piece, and this gets to certainly questions or concerns that came up really both in Towers and at Stevenson regarding the need to do this, if there are things that can be done without this, and the concerns about the capacity at the local level to actually form the level of governance. And so the two questions that I heard come up, which I didn't hear specifically here, had to do with what kinds of safeguards could be put in the petition to ensure that the district's designation as a charter, and this will be, my acronym that I'll coin, would not be CINO or charter in name only, and that it continues to function as it does now. Is there a way to ensure that through the charter process that the name, that the kinds of concerns that they have, particularly regarding autonomy and regards to validation that the maximum number of dollars are actually flowing to the classroom, is actually baked into the charter?
Absolutely, and that's a fair, very fair and very clear observation that we saw across the district at all of our sessions, either from one standpoint or another. And the Department of Education's language in defining charter system petitions, they use the term distributed governance in the exact same format that we have distributed governance in our country between the states and the federal government. There are elements that would be reserved to the local school governance teams, and those elements have to be clearly defined. But there would still be elements that would be reserved to the central office and the district, and those elements have to be defined. We've listed some of the risk criteria before you, including economies of scale, anything that impacts child safety, anything that takes away comparability and equitability between all of the schools. But it is a form of distributed governance, and that is key in drafting any petition. Is what does that distribution look like between the two pieces?
If I may, in response to Mr. Mayfield's question and his comments, as it relates to resources flowing to the classroom, the people who determine that is ultimately the men and women who serve on the school board. Right. I mean, that's whether it's a charter, whether it's traditional, I squared, system of charters. The people who determine how the money is spent are the men and women who serve on the school board.
Right, but just to draw a distinction between that response and the concerns that I heard was that in those meetings was that the public or that the schools wanted to be able to have a way to validate that those dollars that were in fact budgeted or allocated were actually flowing in those schools.
I understand. And to the second point, and I think we need to really make sure that the public understands this. There are thousands of stakeholders, parents, who are perfectly happy with the schools as they operate today. And when we become a charter system, if we become a charter system, we should also recognize that there will be parents and teachers and administrators who decide to continue to operate their schools as they've always operated. That's their choice.
I don't believe that's a choice in the law.
It's a choice. And that's the point. If we really believe in choice, then we should accept parents who want what they want.
I don't disagree with you. I just don't think it's a choice in the law. The law, I think, requires that distributed governance.
If, in fact, number one, you have to have the capacity. You don't distribute it to schools where there is no capacity to take and utilize the authority. That would be counterproductive, right? Is that fair?
I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that.
But you know.
I think that what we may be having here is a difference of semantics, really, where we have these local school governance councils at every school that have legitimate, real, meaningful decision-making authority.
Ms. Gupta, for our listening audience, would you introduce yourself just so people know who you are.
Certainly. I'm Nina Gupta of Nelson Mullins, board attorney. Under the statute, we've got to have these local school governance councils at every school in a charter system, and they have to have meaningful decision-making authority. And to your concern about a charter in name only, remember, it's not this board's sole decision about whether we go charter. We've got to have state board buy-in as well. But if you have a local school governance council that decides we really like the recommendations that we're getting centrally and we don't really want to depart from that, that is a decision that they can make, but they have the power to make that decision. But they actually have to make that decision.
That's the choice. And see, that's what's missing from the discussion generally. And what we have to recognize and not be surprised that if the great majority of parents and other stakeholders decide through their own choice to continue as they are. This doesn't necessarily, and we need to really be careful about that. We are assuming decisions that have not yet been made. All we want to do is give parents, administrators, principals, teachers the choice, and then respect their choice.
But Mr. Superintendent, to our attorney's point, I think we need more guidance on that, because and again, I think it's some semantics, but I think there is some substance here, which is I don't think, as the guidelines are written by the state, and as Phil Hartley has said, that they can simply say, okay, you make all the financial decisions, because the law clearly says on that continuum you've got to push those, and I find it hard to believe that would be, and I don't disagree that it should be. I'm just saying that that's what I don't think that comports with what the law says.
You first have to have the capacity, right? And lacking the capacity, then who would be responsible?
Well, but I think part of that is no, I agree. But I think
who would be responsible?
Absolutely. The reason why I don't support a system of charter schools is exactly for the reason you're pointing out, because that has been proposed by prior board members, and there's no safety net for that, and I completely agree with you. I just think the law pushes us and doesn't allow us an open-ended timetable to create that capacity. So it puts it does put a substantial burden on us.
For the sake of time, if it's okay, since other board members want to make comments, and then after we finish and make a round, then we go back to round two if necessary. Mr. Mayfield, okay. Mr. Coleman, and followed by Dr. Carter.
So I think this is great. We appear to have gotten feedback from board members who are at 4 of the 5 regional meetings. I was at the Dunwoody meeting, so we now have 5 of 5. Mostly wanted to offer some feedback from that meeting that I think will be important in drafting the petition. I think a lot of that was reflected in prior comments or in the comments that you included in the PowerPoint, but I wanted to emphasize a couple of things, a few broad points and then a few specific ones. A broad point would be in terms of the October 6th timeline for petition review and voting. After hearing from folks and hearing the discussion we've had today, I think I'm increasingly uncomfortable with having a vote on the petition if the petition is introduced 10 days prior to that meeting and we're also slated to have public comments. So I would prefer to at least leave a month or at least a few weeks in between our last round of public comments and the formal approval of the petition, because I think that would give us time to think through both our own thoughts on it, the constituent thoughts on it that we hear in that forum, whether that be a called session or a future scheduled session, whether that be end of October or the beginning of November. I do think it wise that we have time to incorporate edits that are a reflection of the petition that's actually produced, which, as I understand, will be produced 10 days prior to that meeting. And certainly I heard that from a number of people at the session. You were there, Mr. Arnold. You did a great job there. The second broad point I'd say is people are pushing for real responsibility and autonomy in these governance councils. So as we're drafting the petition, the more that we can put guardrails in place, not only talking about when we limit that autonomy, but reinforcing very strictly how we grant that autonomy and how it would be different than the status quo, I think is really essential to the public trust. I mean, that was the thing that kept coming back again and again. So I'd love to see that iterated. Third thing, certainly there were a series of comments related to the cost of this initiative. both in terms of where we'd allocate additional revenues that would come to us as part of a charter system, because we get an extra $4.5 million, I think, in QBE funding as a result of converting to a charter system, and making sure that that additional revenue was, in fact, funneled with guardrails in our petition to the classroom and for innovations in the classroom rather than for more centrally located innovations. And I thought that was a fair comment, receiving additional funding for that purpose. The second was just the cost of administering all of these local school governance councils, since we'll have well north of 100. You know, there were a lot of comments saying, and this is an administrative point and just advice to the administration, a lot of comments saying it would be great if we could repurpose resources in the central office to provide that function rather than adding resources to provide that function, because there is some oversight and interaction with the governance councils that will have to take place. A few specific points and then I'll be done. One is they wanted a clear process for waiver requests in the petition, and also a clear timeline by which we plan to respond to those waiver requests, and a clear, transparent process by which to respond. The fear was you introduce 100 and something governance councils, and you apply for a waiver, and 2 years later it comes in, right? And what they wanted was some transparency about a safeguard to say, in a reasonable time period, we will respond to your waiver request, and there will be a reasonable and transparent way to appeal decisions on that. Should you either modify to meet those objections, or should you continue to have objections? I thought this was a great suggestion, so I'll throw it out. Encouraging our school governance councils to have students on the governance council, or at least one student for high schools and potentially middle schools, certainly not elementary schools. Although that might be the most interesting feedback we'd get.
You'd be surprised.
That was the one sticking point with our student advisory council. They all wanted to be on the council,
Yeah.
and they wanted to have voting rights too.
I think that's a great idea, especially for our high school students. I mean, we could debate anything other than that, but I think that having a high school student there would be good. And I would say there was, and this is a broader request, but also within the petition, similar to how we'd have a clear process for waivers and appeals for waivers, a clear process for appeals of conversion charter systems in the new governance framework. Because as Mr. Arnold laid out in that session and others, you know, in the charter system, we can still have charter clusters, we can still have conventional charter schools, those won't go away. We could charter 10 clusters the first year of the charter system if that were the prerogative of the board. And we can have, yeah, that's exactly right. And so having clear processes to appeal decisions on those in the future governance framework was something that folks desired. So those are all comments, not questions, but I thought it would be good to reflect those.
Dr. Carter?
Thank you. I appreciate everybody's substantive comments. I am mindful that the Flexibility Advisory Committee is reflective of our district. Parents, students, our civic and our business partners have been a part of this conversation for almost a year now. And so certainly what you see in Mr. Arnold's presentation is a reflection of their continuous work and their engagement of their community partners that they bring back, and the feedback that they bring to the committee every time we meet. There's an opportunity for reflection. And so several of the comments that you are sharing, as well as things that you heard in the various community listening meetings, have bubbled up through that committee, and that committee will continue, I believe, to struggle with the things that are challenging, the things that you can do if you go down the road of a charter system, how you can provide opportunities for traditional schools to remain traditional, magnet schools to remain magnet schools, or for schools to align themselves in a cluster. And I think it's important for us to appreciate that there is diversity in that conversation and in the room. Having said that, I've got a slightly different question. Should we choose to go forward with the petition to meet the November 1 timeline, what are the options to pull back should we get a different message from the state in November?
The timeline from the state, as noted from our board attorney, after the board votes, should they vote to approve, is just actually the beginning point. The petition is then submitted to the Department of Education for review to make sure that the application is in line with their expectations. Should there be any problems, the Board of Education would then send it, or excuse me, the Department of Education would then send it back to the district for completion of whatever elements are missing. At that point, once the Department of Education is satisfied, it then refers it over to the Charter Advisory Committee, which is a state-level committee that is comprised of individuals appointed by the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the state school superintendent. Those individuals will be tasked with reviewing the petition as well as the capacity for the district to support the elements and innovation that are in the district. It includes site visits and interviews with board members, parents, teachers, students, district office staff to make sure that that petition can be supported. And the Charter Advisory Committee will then make a recommendation to the State Board of Education for their April 2015 vote. Again, as the State Board of Education that makes that final decision, they can go with the recommendation or go in a different direction. If they approve that recommendation, they enter into contract with the local Board of Education. All that said, so that the timeline, according to the Department of Education, is met, in order for that timeline to begin and the process to start, their timeline is that the petition has to be submitted by November 1. So there is a bit of a lag between the November 1 submission date and the proposed elements that, again, and this is proposed, may or may not be approved by the State Board of Education.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask, I didn't hear the retraction there.
No. So, but here's the thing, and I think the bottom line is we don't know. So we have to operate on the timeline that the Department of Education has provided, which is November 1 today. It doesn't prevent us legally from changing our mind, does it?
That's right. We can withdraw the petition if we want to. There's nothing that prevents us from submitting a subsequent petition as well.
Very good. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you, Mr. Arnold. You have done an incredible job of harnessing a lot of information and a lot of diverse interests and concerns, and you've done it with grace and aplomb. And I want to say thank you for that effort.
And I would have to add, I mean, he handled some very dynamic conversations in those meetings quite skillfully, and I certainly applaud you for that.
And I might add that Mr. McMahon and I would wish we had your blood, because evidently you have ice water in your blood, because you were asked some very heated questions along that line. I'll wait till last to make my comments. Dr. Irwin.
Mr. Arnold, a couple quick questions. In the meeting at Towers High School, I don't know if we ever got clarity on this, and I don't know if it's been answered, but maybe vaguely. What does that autonomy actually look like? Because you guys are drafting a petition. I guess you got 14 days to get it done, basically.
The autonomy that is granted to schools is really, well, it's kind of, there's two pieces to the question. Number one, schools have the autonomy to be able to request flexibility and innovation from state laws within their own capacity. So in other words, should a school wish to incorporate a program or develop a schedule or any element that right now is restricted because of state law, that school would have that autonomy to do so, as long as certain risk criteria are not impacted. So if we get, I guess, a very simple example that I gave at one of the presentations when this question came up had to do with a facilities question, and since I've got Mr. Williamson here next to me, the question was, let's suppose that a school decides that they want to put in a certain type of playground equipment, but that playground equipment does not meet certain legal requirements that are expected for playground equipment to ensure the safety and well-being of the student. Well, the point of this distributed governance is that the district would stop that innovative practice from going forward, because that innovative practice puts students at risk, involves the district in legal affairs, and would not be one that would be in the best interest of those students. So there is autonomy that is granted, but again, that autonomy is also granted at a level where specific risk criteria can limit it. It is distributed autonomy and governance, and because of elements that that could impact student safety, impacts economies of scale, prevent comparability among all the schools in the district. That might be a restrictive piece that will stop an innovative practice from moving forward.
Okay, and another question that was asked at Towers High School was, if there was an innovative practice such as hiring or firing of principals, will that local governance happen in that type of realm? Or teachers or whomever on the staff that the local governance team deems to be not in line with what they want to do?
The termination and hiring of employees would more than likely still remain a district function. However, in regards to principals, the local school governance team would have an impact and have an involvement in the selection of those principals. And so this is not necessarily, going back to Mr. Orson's point, something that even requires a charter system to exist. There was a point when principals, including myself, as part of the interview process, was interviewed by parents in that school. So parents would have an engaged process in that, but the petition would have to clearly outlay at what level does that process rise to.
Not to keep hammering at this, but when you go to the Georgia Department of Education website, it's very broad and it says personnel decisions. For the life of me, I'm trying to figure out, by what you have just stated and what's on the Georgia Department of Education, what does that mean? Because if you're telling me it's a personnel decision, I'm thinking everybody's getting a paycheck as personnel.
Right. The Department of Education has provided documents, or I shouldn't say had not provided documents, but has reviewing documents to specifically address that level and whether or not that just equates to the principal or to the entire staff. There is discussion at the charter division to clarify what that would look like. And
that may change?
That could change, yes, sir.
And one last question, to respect everybody's time. The last question that was on a few people's minds that night, and I got a couple emails about it, why would we support going into a charter system if it does not force us to address class size? I know you remember that.
Yes, sir. Yeah. It's a good question. And, going to a charter system, from the broad perspective of class size, it may not necessarily impact class size in totality across the district. But it does provide opportunities for local schools and their local school governance teams to make decisions relative to class sizes and how they go about allocating resources at their local school level. So for an example, again, an anecdotal example might be that a school may wish to request a waiver to limitations associated with physical education class sizes so that they can reduce the number of sections that a physical education teacher might have to teach, so as to free up the availability for more sections for a core class, and thereby by having more sections for that core class, reduce the number of students in that class. You cannot waive the QBE funding formula. You're going to get the same dollar amount no matter what, but it's the allocation associated with that is flexible.
The reduction of class size is still going to fall within the board and the budget, basically.
That is correct.
All right.
Mr. Arnold, one of the great things about going last is most of my colleagues have asked a lot of questions that I would ask. I'll weigh in. I was with you at Lithonia High School, and you did, as my colleagues say, you did an outstanding job there fielding questions. Two things that stand out with me before we left that night. I remember, and I think Mr. Coleman spoke to this, if we could, after we have the proposed petition drafted, I think a lot of the community wanted to take a look at that before it's actually submitted. I know we have a 10-day window to review that, but to Mr. Coleman's point, I think if we can give the public some additional time, to the superintendent also, I think that really speaks volumes about we're trying to make this as transparent as possible with them having an opportunity to weigh in. I remember one of the conversations that came up also dealt with, and I guess Dr. Carter's already asked, why do we have to do something? I think a lot of the parents are thinking, we have this system in place already. why do we have to make a decision? Can we operate as status quo? For the viewing public that's watching tonight, can you speak to that? What would happen if we just did nothing at all and let the school system remain as it is?
Well, that's a moving target too, and I'll be honest with you. I mean, I'm not trying to be facetious at all, and I respect the question completely. And let me reference back to previous language that's been presented from the Department of Education, not only to DeKalb, but to multiple districts across the state as they move around, presenting to districts, that according to their guidance, after June 30th, 2015, no waivers will be granted at all. And DeKalb, as well as multiple other districts, do request waivers from the Department of Education. That in and of itself is a status quo district. So remaining as a status quo district, really all of these options that are available relate to two pieces. Number one, who owns the petition? Who is the petition between? The State Department of Education, and at what level? Is it a school level petition like a charter school? Is it a district level petition like the district? And number two, what waivers are necessary for that system to be able to function, or what level of waivers is the district seeking? In a charter system option, or in a charter school option, or in a system of charter clusters, whatever the variable is, when the word charter is used, the expectation is that blanket waivers are going to be granted. In an IE squared option, the original language of IE squared was that the waivers had to be enumerated, and they were district-wide waivers. And then in a status quo system, which now the language being used is changing from status quo to a traditional system, is one in which no waivers are granted, except in cases of natural emergency. But again, that may change. And it's important to note that, as a reference, any district who is a charter district and subsequently loses their petition or does not get a renewal of that petition, they are considered to, for lack of a better way, and I think perhaps even the Department of Education's own language, revert to a traditional or a status quo system. So, in other words, you move to where there are no waivers granted at your district level.
So, in essence, some of the benefits that we can gain through a waiver, we will not have that opportunity if we remain as is.
You do have the opportunity to remain as is if the board chooses not to vote or not to approve the petition, and seeks to remain as a status quo or traditional system, however they approve it, then the board and the district remains as such, but no waivers are scheduled to be granted after June 30, 2015. Again, that is current legislative ruling and is subject to change.
Mr. McMahon.
Thank you, Chairman. And I appreciate everybody chiming in. That's how important this process is. And once again, chime in on thanking you, Mr. Arnold. You don't get paid enough to do that. With that being said, I do look forward to getting the report. And I think once we do get the initial petition, that is when the process for the community input and everybody input. And I look forward to that. And we'll go through that process. And it will be a transparent and a listening and inclusive of the entire district. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McMahon. I was at 4 sessions. You did a marvelous job, and we appreciate you and your staff for doing a great job and communicating to our public. One thing I think that was mentioned, that not been mentioned here today, was the fact that I gleaned from my observation, the qualifications of the governance team. That was a big question. Now, you don't have to respond to that. They were talking about the process for selecting the governance team, as well as the qualifications of the governance team, and we know the ramifications around that. The other item that I think is very significant is the fact that the governance team want some autonomy in selecting the principal, because of the importance of the principal and the accountability component part to that. With that said, I want to thank you for.
Just one more. Just one.
It got to be quick.
And that's only to find out if between now and we get the petition, if there is a way to communicate to the public, to these various sites or communities, on a clear definition of what the expectations are on autonomy and validation of dollars going into schools, in order for us to get enough time to receive that input to see if that's where they want to go. That if they find the autonomy to be too restrictive, that we would essentially know that prior to our vote.